2 consecutive years, Notre Dame has had to win the final 10 games of its regular season to keep alive its playoff hopes. The Irish did just that Saturday night into Sunday morning with a 49-20 win at Stanford. It prompted some people to hold their breaths. It's prompted an exhale. And ultimately now it prompts at least a week of a little bit more held breath. I am John Brice of footballscoop.com and Irish Illustrated. He is Drew Hungerstrike Mentock of Irish Illustrated as well. And our producer's Tom Zwiller. This is Irish Illustrated's Overtime Live, the morning after Stanford. Drew, your initial thoughts on the game and the exhalation, temporary because Jeremiah Love is A-OK, and now back on again as Notre Dame prepares to hold its breath over the final week of college football's regular season and conference championship games.
Yes, I think just that the performance on the field was even more dominant than the 49-20 score would indicate. I mean, Notre Dame was up, as most people saw, 35-3 at half. Only give up 90 yards in the first half and had 319 yards on offense. So just really dominant. I think Marcus Freeman even touched on it after the game that maybe they let up again because they did leave their defensive starters out there maybe a little longer than you would have thought. I think whether he would like to admit it or not, Marcus Freeman is aware of style points matter and things like that. So, but Notre Dame had this game handily taken care of, and I'll be curious how that kind of stuff is looked at by the committee. It might help. I don't know if all the members were staying up late, but it was the only game really to watch last night. So I'd be kind of curious how that's perceived because it was a thorough beatdown for most of the game, even if the final score might look closer than, I believe it was 42-7 that Miami beat Stanford by a few weeks ago.
Yeah, good points there. You wonder how much of the country saw Notre Dame until the very end. And I would imagine quite a few televisions were flipped off when it was 35-3 at the half or early into the third quarter when it was still also like 42-6. But the exhale on Jeremiah Love, who appeared to suffer a rib injury during the opening half of the game, missed several series, eventually did return and also spoke to reporters post-game. That's always a key sign that a player is truly okay when he's allowed to come out and meet the media. I think we can actually hear Jeremiah Love's own original comments and audio here, thanks to our Tom Zwiller. If you want to go ahead and cue that up for us, TZ.
So initially, I think the guy just fell on my ribs, like bruised it. Went into the tent. I felt like I was good immediately, but they wanted to make sure I was good, so they took me back to do an extra test. Everything came out right. Just a bruise. But I felt good immediately after, they looked at me and all that type of stuff. Just had to build up back my confidence, go out there and hit or get hit. Confidence built back up and just felt good.
Did you come?
So there you have it. He said his confidence was good. He felt good. It sounds like he would have liked to have returned to the game sooner. I do think there's a message within the message, Drew. That was Notre Dame's final game of the regular season. As we said in the intro, it now must wait a full week before the playoff field is revealed next Sunday on December 7th at noon Eastern. I think Notre Dame allowing Jeremiah Love to go back into the game and speak after the game is very much letting the committee know, hey, this guy's okay. We're going to have him in the playoffs as well.
Right, because that is something they said. If you lose, for instance, what we saw with Florida State a few years ago, if you lose one of your key players, that is something they can hold against you. And Jeremiah Love, as Marcus Freeman said repeatedly in his post-game press conference, whether he wanted to or not, is the best player in the country in his mind. So losing him would be a significant factor. So getting him back in the game, let him take some of those hits. And it did look, when you saw him on the ground at first and they first sat him up and he must have felt that bruise on his rib, it looked pretty agonizing. He had a reaction that was a little alarming. So to kind of counteract that with everything you just said, I think is a big deal. And Notre Dame was smart to let him ultimately make that decision. You don't want to force somebody to go back into the game. Marcus Freeman was very clear that he left it up to you're good to go, but it's up to you if you want to do this or not. And I think it's good that he did for Notre Dame's playoff hopes this week.
Yeah, he had a real visible grimace, if not a visceral grimace, that we could see there on the television replay. And then a few times on the sideline, you could see him wince, but you could also repeatedly see him telling people, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. He was smiling. He was cutting up with teammates. So that was important. Stanford did an overall very effective job of bottling him up. 14 carries for 66 yards, I think, was his final stat line, only a long of 18. But he adds another touchdown. He continues to wedge himself more and more into the Notre Dame record books and near the top in so many different categories. And as we noted, another touchdown and complete control, Drew. And we're going to dive in. I know most people at this point are beyond Stanford and on to the college football playoffs to paraphrase North Carolina's losing head coach Bill Belichick on the whole of the season. But the Irish hope to be on to the playoffs. But in this game, Drew, what we talked about pregame came to fruition. Notre Dame came out, ended things early with a 14-0 start to the first quarter, and then really one of the most electrifying special teams plays we've seen Notre Dame have in recent years, and they've been flat-out elite, first under Brian Mason and the last 3 years under Marty Biaggi, especially with some of their gadget plays.
Yes, and that was, they were at their own 16-yard line. That was not something I expected, but Marcus Freeman said after the game that's something they've been working on for weeks. They saw a look that they wanted, and they knew as soon as if they saw that they were going to check to it. And, they ran it flawlessly. Josh Burnham showing off his little punch or push pass was a nice touch there. And then Luke Talich did a better job of outrunning the defense than he did 2 years ago against USC when he had that pick six and barely made it in. So he looked like he remembered how to. I think his comment after that was, I just forgot how to run. And this time he looked a little more sure of himself.
Yeah, Luke wheels Talich on the 84-yard reception from Josh Burnham. Pretty good way for Josh Burnham to stamp his name into the Notre Dame-Stanford rivalry. Drew, what are some other components of the contest last night? Again, Notre Dame racing to a 35-3 halftime lead, 42-6 through three quarters, and then couldn't get off the field in the fourth quarter, really for a lot of the second half. And we'll break that down just a little bit more. But just your initial thoughts on the game in general.
I think it's still shocking to me that Elijah Brown targeted Leonard Moore as often as he did. They had some key moments throughout the game, and maybe that's just where his read took him, and Notre Dame was getting pressure. But, Leonard Moore statistically had one of his best games just because they kept putting it in his way. He had 5 tackles, 3 pass breakups, which I think he only had 3 or 4 coming into this game because teams usually don't throw to him unless it's a very advantageous situation. Then obviously had that interception at the end of the first half that set up another late score for Notre Dame to Jadarian Price. So, just very surprising that that's what happened. But I think it's good for, as we kind of get into these award seasons, or we're already in the midst of it. He's up for the Bronco Nagurski Award, the Thorpe Award. Those would be tough awards to win, especially with a guy like Caleb Downs on there for the Thorpe Award too. But that's the type of performance that might carry some sway with the voters.
Yeah, a bunch of good questions firing in already from Kevin Garrity and others. Can't thank you all enough for joining us here on this Sunday morning, wherever you are. Again, the Irish win 49-20. Let's start with first things first. How closely do the committee members watch the games? On a Saturday, it depends on what their vocations are. I doubt Hunter Yurachek watched anything yesterday much other than his Arkansas team losing a rivalry game to Missouri to close out one of Arkansas's most brutal seasons of this century. What I will tell you is they do spend an insane amount of time next weekend watching games, all the conference championship games together deep into the night. Then they review film. I know Rich Clark, the CFP executive director, told me last year that they watch games and video until maybe 2 a.m. there in the Dallas area where they are headquartered at the Gaylord Opryland and Grapevine. And then we're back up at 7:30 the next morning. So that gives you an idea. There's a full screen of TVs that you can watch. They set it up in kind of a hidden ballroom off one of the floors there in the Gaylord. So it's up to each individual committee member this time of year to watch as much video as possible from this weekend's games before they vote on Tuesday. And I think they typically arrive on Monday evenings before the Tuesday, and then they go from there. Some people may not fly in until Tuesday, but then they have their deliberations and go from there. So that's a really good question. A bunch of questions about whether or not Ole Miss could be punished if Lane Kiffin leaves. Lane Kiffin's leaving. He's accepted the LSU job. But they have pushed back the team meeting. It was supposed to be unfolding right now as we were going live. Ole Miss was scheduled to have a 10 a.m. meeting, at which point in time Lane Kiffin was going to inform the team that he had accepted the LSU job and will be moving on from there. But it's my understanding he was going to tell the team very passionately that he wanted to coach them throughout the playoffs and was doing everything in his power to coach them throughout the playoffs. Thus far, Ole Miss administration, led by athletics director Keith Carter, has drawn a real line in the sand about not wanting to have Lane Kiffin coach the playoffs. And in fact, Ole Miss has already spoken with a couple of other members of the coaching staff about the fact that they would be in charge of the team moving forward, including discussing who would be an interim coach and perhaps divvying up responsibilities in a different manner if Kiffin and multiple other coaches leave. That meeting, again, now scheduled for 1 p.m. Central, 2 Eastern. We'll continue to monitor that all day, of course, at Football Scoop. I would not think that the committee would outright punish Ole Miss, not enough to make a big difference, because the committee is going to say, we're not going to punish the kids. We're not going to punish the players. We're not going to punish Ole Miss for what it's done across an 11-1 regular season just because its head coach is accepting a new job and starting a new chapter. Now, what I would tell you would be if and probably this wouldn't come out. If Ole Miss left, or excuse me, if Lane Kiffin left Ole Miss and today a bunch of players said on Twitter or social media, Instagram, what have you, that they were going to sit out the CFP game and held fast to that, that would be a different story. The CFP committee would absolutely take that into consideration when seating the Rebels next week. And as for whether or not Notre Dame can jump Oklahoma, I think there's merit to that argument. I really do. I think there's strong merit to that argument because I thought Oklahoma looked very pedestrian yesterday against a very, very pedestrian LSU team that, by the way, just set the record for futility on offense in program history with, I think, failing to score more than 20 points against all 11 FBS foes over the balance of the season. Drew, as we dive into the college football playoff picture, what are your general thoughts there, again, on how Notre Dame has handled its business for 10 consecutive games and kind of what's going on elsewhere in the college football world?
Yeah, I think that's an incredible stat that Oklahoma failed to score 20 points. I think they scored 23 maybe against Alabama, but yeah, that offense has not looked great. And kind of to that point, one of the reasons I think Notre Dame kind of gets a boost is because if you look at a lot of the predictive metrics like ESPN's FPI or SP Plus, Notre Dame's like often in the top 5 or sometimes up to 3 or 4 like they are in the FPI. Oklahoma fell to 16th today. So there are teams that Notre Dame kind of gets a boost, I think, from the fact that they look like a top 5 team and they have statistics to back that up. Oklahoma actually has statistics to back up the fact that it shouldn't even be in the top 15 right now. So I think some of that stuff does carry weight. And Notre Dame has won its last. Marcus Freeman said repeatedly they've won. This whole win streak has been by double digits. That's true. But they've also won, I think, their last 4 games by an average of 38.3 points per game. So they're dominating the way you want them to as well. And I think if you listen to like a lot of the people who do those advanced metrics, like that matters, like big wins, shutouts, near shutouts, like all those type of things go towards putting together a better team. So I think there's a lot of narratives out there that, well, like a lot of teams could have gone 10-2 against Notre Dame's schedule. And maybe that's true, but they couldn't have produced the type of wins that Notre Dame's produced against its schedule as well. And I think that's something that the committee, based on listening to them talk every Tuesday on the conference call and things like that, they really do pay attention and notice those things. So I think they'll see how dominant Notre Dame was early, and maybe they took their foot off the gas just a little bit in the second half. But those things matter, and Notre Dame is proving itself that it belongs. It's one of the teams that could potentially win the national championship, and I think that really pushes it towards a team that they want to keep in the field if they can.
Yeah, I think right now, as things are probably examined and projected for all the potential college football playoff teams, Notre Dame would probably have maybe probably top 5 odds, I would say, on winning a national championship. I would put Ohio State certainly number 1, and then I think there would be a little bit of a considerable gap between number 1 Ohio State and numbers 2 through 5. And I would think the ability to win a national championship, the odds 2 through 5 would be some combination of Indiana, maybe Texas A&M and Georgia, and Notre Dame right there in that mix. I think that the Irish would fare very well kind of in that regard. And if I misspoke earlier about the Oklahoma offense, I apologize. I was saying Oklahoma struggled against an LSU offense that has set a record for futility in its 11 games against FBS opponents this year. I don't think the offense had a game. LSU did not have a game this year where it scored more than 25 points against any power conference foe, and I don't think those were all offensive points. So the stat was that LSU failed to score more than 20 points on offense in all 11 of its FBS games, I believe, this year. But again, Oklahoma, some struggles as well. They had some good performances on offense in league play, certainly put up a lot of points and yards against Ole Miss despite losing 34-26 in that contest. But Oklahoma needed a complete busted coverage yesterday and a guy running wide open. And then still LSU had a chance to perhaps win the game after already having missed an opportunity to take a 16-10 lead instead of a 13-10 lead. But 17-13 against a dead LSU team that has no head coach presently at the moment, had absolutely zero to play for, is certainly, I think, something that will be debated amongst the committee. Elsewhere, Notre Dame got help from Ohio State, as weird as that sounds, but that was an important one to just go ahead and completely eliminate Michigan from consideration. But Drew, not really much help anywhere else on the horizon for Notre Dame, and not much Notre Dame can do other than gnash its teeth and hold its breath for the entire next week. And I've been saying it for days. I cannot say it any harder. If you are an Irish fan, you should buy tortillas and throw them throughout your house this week the way Texas Tech fans do. You should put on the Zorro mask, do your best Red Raider. You need Texas Tech to win and to go ahead and paddle BYU this Saturday in the Big 12 championship.
Yes, and I think it was Bud Elliott after the game. I don't know if this is still the same, but the odds that DraftKings, it might have been, actually he doesn't list who it was, but the Notre Dame's price to make the playoffs, or their odds, was the exact opposite of BYU's chances to win the Big 12 championship next week. So we'll see where things are on Tuesday. There's a chance Notre Dame could be safer than we realize if they jumped Oklahoma and no one jumped them. That would be significant, but I agree. They need Texas A&M to win. And honestly, if they can do it in dominating fashion again and give them no even remote potential justification to have BYU somehow jump or move up or anything like that. So I agree. That's a huge game. It's also going to be really curious to see if Miami does get a little closer. Like, do they jump BYU and kind of even get more of those direct comparisons against Notre Dame after, another really impressive performance for the Hurricanes against Pitt, who kind of looked like they were being competitive for a little bit there. And then they had a fourth down stop and then a taunting penalty after that ended up giving Miami a score. And after that, it seemed like the wheels really fell off for them. So where they are, but if Notre Dame and Miami are both done, because Miami obviously isn't in the ACC championship. So if Notre Dame is ahead of Miami on Tuesday, presumably that's going to be significant, because there's no other way that Miami can suddenly jump them after that, even if somehow they end up being ranked right next to them. So that will be really interesting to see how kind of all those things shake out.
Yeah, I overall agree with you. Again, I think the number one thing is to be a Texas Tech Red Raider fan this entire week. If you're a Notre Dame fan, I think that is the clearest pathway. There are some other scenarios, and I know you looked at I think it is FEI, and I looked at the ESPN All-State Playoff Predictor this morning. That program gave Notre Dame a 93% chance of still making the CFP. Drew, what were some of the latest figures that you saw in that regard?
Yeah, the FPI has Notre Dame at a 83.4% chance, and FanDuel has Notre Dame at minus 400 to make the CFP. And to your point earlier too, FanDuel has Notre Dame with the fourth best odds to win it all currently at plus 1,000. Ohio State and Indiana are first, and then Georgia. So even with it not being a 100% certainty that they're in, FanDuel has some confidence there. Although they're not necessarily going to price futures to be exactly predictive. They're basing them based on what people bet. So take that with a grain of salt to a degree. But
yeah, and I do want to share, as I've tried to study this last night after the game in preparation for the show, as well as this morning, I do think that the top 8 teams in last week's CFP rankings are pretty much all of their percentages, based on everything I've seen, are over 99% to advance to the CFP. So that's Ohio State, Indiana, Georgia, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Oregon, Ole Miss, and I guess Oklahoma. Yeah, Oklahoma I saw had a better than 99% chance after its win yesterday. I believe the ESPN indicated its metrics had Oklahoma with a 30% chance or less had it lost to LSU yesterday. Then, of course, the ACC champ and the G5 champ, because those will be the next 2 highest rated conference champions. Again, it doesn't have to be all 4 conference power conference champions and a G5. In theory, it could be 2 G5s. And I would say that would be an interesting scenario because of the ACC championship, just to continue to see who is going to win that ACC championship. And if it was not Virginia, what would that mean? I think that, if Duke as a 5-loss team somehow beat Virginia and won the ACC championship, but then Tulane routs North Texas and James Madison blows out Jared Parker's Troy Trojans, I don't know yet what that looks like. I'm sure that will be a point brought up this week. But, Drew, that could potentially leave the ACC out of the CFP, in my opinion. But the point is, the top 8 seeds are secured basically no matter what. Then you have the ACC champ. Then you have the G5 champ, which means you have 2 at-large bids, realistically, going between Notre Dame, Alabama, BYU, and Miami. I don't buy into the people that are still trying to force Texas into the conversation. A 3-loss Texas, in my opinion, has no pathway above a 2-loss Miami or Notre Dame. But, Drew, as we continue to break this down, what are some of your additional thoughts about where Notre Dame sits and where you think the playoff committee and kind of the Tetris puzzle is forming right now?
Yeah, I just want to touch on Oklahoma one more time. I think they probably are safe just because it's that Alabama buffer right there helps them. So I think Notre Dame could still potentially jump them, but 9 is pretty safe. The 10 through 12 is not if Texas Tech loses this weekend. But even if it would take Notre Dame and Miami to jump them, which seems pretty unlikely after, closing out the season 10-2 for that to happen. So I don't think it's out of the realm of the possibilities that Notre Dame does get ahead of them, but I also understand why Oklahoma is probably safe in that scenario. I agree that ACC is that's definitely interesting. I'm sure they're kicking themselves, the ACC commissioner and the people who are in charge of that conference, for not having tiebreaker scenarios in modern college football that just go to the highest ranked team, because obviously there isn't that much head-to-head competition anymore now that there's so many teams in these major conferences. So that's definitely something that puts them in a position where they could not have a team in the college football playoffs this year, which would be a disastrous scenario for that conference.
Yeah, and to elaborate a little bit further on that, when we just listed Texas Tech as what we believe, or I believe, I don't want to put words into Drew's mouth, and what all the metrics show is going to be a qualifying team no matter what happens in the Big 12 championship game. Now, having said that, I don't see a pathway where Texas Tech would drop below Notre Dame with a Big 12 championship game loss unless BYU somehow blew out the Red Raiders. But again, all the metrics, Texas Tech is right up there with Notre Dame and might be ahead of Notre Dame across the board in terms of game control, what it has done to blow out teams this week. It's 49 win yesterday on the road at West Virginia. Again, West Virginia, dreadful in a rebuilding year under Rich Rod, but did beat Pittsburgh earlier this year. But it's 49-0 win yesterday is the largest for the program in conference history for any conference road game. So that's significant. Texas Tech playing really good ball, closing teams out. I agree. Alabama is terrible running the football. I think despite the fact that they have Caden Proctor, who's a surefire first-round NFL draft pick and a really good tackle, they have not run the ball well. Georgia, can you really only consistently run the ball with Gunnar Stockton? And certainly he's taken a beating, and the Bulldogs are mindful of that. So you're right. Drew, just any additional thoughts on last night's game or anything that you feel we've missed as we approach 30 minutes here and wrapping up Notre Dame's 10-2 2025 regular season? I do want to note that win boosted Marcus Freeman to a 22-8 record away from Notre Dame Stadium since the start of the 2022 season. Again, that is second only to Kirby Smart, who is somewhere around 25-4 after winning Friday inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta against Georgia Tech.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Texas Tech winning is priority number one for Notre Dame. ESPN's matchup predictor gives Texas Tech a 66.6% chance to win that game. So definitely root for that. Also root for, I mean, if Alabama gets blown out, like that eliminates any, that could even drop them. Like that's the other thing that's probably going to be the most important thing going into next weekend. But it's not as important as the Texas Tech game for sure. And we'll have a better idea on Tuesday again. But Notre Dame's done all it's could. I mean, I think the committee really values the fact that Notre Dame, even though we would say that Notre Dame looked bad in that Texas A&M loss, especially on defense, that's not necessarily how it's viewed in the committee's mind. They view it as a 1-point loss to a team that's still probably going to be in the top 10. So I think they look at Notre Dame's threshold of when they were playing poorly as still being a really good team. And that has only gotten better. Whereas when they compare them to somebody like Miami, they look at it as a team that has had some moments where they actually played poorly, especially Carson Beck, who they noted specifically on Tuesday as somebody who hurt their consistency. And that's why they lost to two teams that they shouldn't have. And so that it's going to be really curious to see how those performances, I know people don't like them being punished for bad losses, but they view Notre Dame as a more consistent team across the board that has only gotten better. And it's almost like Marcus Freeman was prepared with some of those talking points in his press conference and on ESPN yesterday, because that is something that the committee has echoed. And Miami has started to look like that consistent team again. And I'll be really curious on Tuesday to see how much weight that actually carries.
Yeah, great points there. I would think Texas A&M will drop no lower than 7th. That's the reality of it. They're not going to be a one-loss team that drops below Oklahoma or any members of the 2-loss brigade. They may not drop beyond 5th, to be honest with you. Oregon and Ole Miss may stand pat, and Texas A&M may just drop down to the 5 spot. It's not like Texas A&M. Texas controlled that game across the second half, but it's not like Texas A&M was blown out 45-17 on the road. I really contend that where things stand right now, I do believe Miami will jump BYU this week in the CFP rankings. I would be pretty surprised, actually, if not, because of the fact, and I was at that BYU game yesterday. I know some people on both coaching staffs working on some stuff there. I do know that BYU was down 14-0 in the first quarter at home against Central Florida, and really struggled to put a very bad Golden Knights team away. Whereas meanwhile, Miami went up and closed out its regular season with a real pantsing of Pat Narduzzi and the Pitt Panthers, completely throttled down and bottled up Cade Bell's would-be high-flying offense. Certainly the defensive jobs that Notre Dame did and that Miami did on Cade Bell's offense in 2 of the Panthers' final 3 games, I think is noteworthy. Really stymied that, really made the freshman quarterback look bad. But I think because of that, Miami has a great shot to leap BYU in this week's rankings. That, of course, could potentially be significant because that opens up the floor to more conversation about that Notre Dame Miami head-to-head. Also, I'm curious how the committee, if Notre Dame is viewed as safely in on Tuesday, if Alabama is viewed as safely in on Tuesday night and then loses a close game to Georgia in the SEC championship, I wonder how much pressure. Well, I know how much pressure. It will be immense pressure the committee will get. It should almost have to be sequestered like a jury and not allowed to see anything from the media, because the SEC hype machine will be real if Alabama goes and loses a close game to Georgia in the SEC championship.
Yes, if we think the ACC's kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, propaganda against Notre Dame for Miami has been bad, the SEC's after that will be 10 times. So they're much more powerful. Greg Sankey is a much bigger voice and has lobbied for them to get, I believe, 6 teams into the CFP this year. So they're definitely going to want to protect Alabama at all costs, for sure. That's a good point by you.
Yeah, so that's it. That wraps it up. Notre Dame 10-2 with a redshirt freshman quarterback, and its backs against the wall. By my tabulation, I think that is now 23 wins and just 1 loss for Notre Dame across the past 2 seasons in must-win games. Of course, after that early loss to Northern Illinois in 2024, the Irish ripped off 13 consecutive wins before losing to Ohio State in the Natty, making them 13-1. This year thus far, 10-0 after dropping their first 2 games by a total of 4 points. So if you're a Notre Dame fan, you would very much like to see the Irish not put their backs against the wall. But, man, does this team respond. Drew, any final thoughts on the Notre Dame regular season? And also we should note we'll be coming to you multiple times this week with Irish Illustrated Insider Podcast, as well as other instant analysis and things, as Wednesday is early National Signing Day.
Yes, I think just Marcus Freeman's steadfast belief in the team and that he can get things solved. I mean, the sky felt like it was falling after the 0-2 start in the defense, and people were obviously calling for Chris Ash to be fired, and he deserves a lot of credit. But I think Marcus Freeman's just temperament and willingness to go in, and I mean, he's been through this before. Al Golden had to throw out a bunch of stuff after his first year. Marcus Freeman wasn't going to wait until after the season to make them kind of simplify things and do it differently. And just, I think it really shows the growth we've seen from him as a head coach over 4 years, which is to be expected, but he clearly is somebody who learns from past mistakes and learns from things. And you see how that's kind of carried through, because other teams could have fallen apart or lost another game. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, they've won every game since by double digits. And they felt, even bad games like Boston College, there was no thought that they were going to lose that game. It was just how close was it going to look, or how upset were fans going to be after watching them kind of letting a really bad Boston College team hang around. But we've seen a lot of improvement out of this team for sure.
Yeah, a 10-point win against USC in that stretch, a 15-point win against Boston College in that stretch, and otherwise Notre Dame has won every single other game during this 10-game winning streak by at least 21 points. We barely mentioned the defense. You had some good notes about the defensive dominance Saturday night, especially in the first half. Do want to note, as you also alluded to, Drake Bowen led the team with 7 total tackles. He also had a half sack. And then Leonard Moore, you mentioned Caleb Downs, but Leonard Moore played like a Thorpe Award winner last night with 5 solo tackles, broke up 3 passes, intercepted a pass. I should note, we started this show this morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. It's my understanding that Notre Dame only landed about 90 minutes ago back in South Bend. So to give you an idea of what kind of real disservice, frankly, that was for Notre Dame to have to kick off a game at 10:30 on the West Coast, 10:30 Eastern on the West Coast. And certainly some Big Ten teams have experienced that because of the Big Ten expansion. But, yeah, Notre Dame, no favors, flew home all night, did not get home till, again, probably in the 8:30 to 8:45 range, I was told this morning. That's really, really brutal for them. But that's going to wrap it up for this final regular season edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. He is Drew Mentock of Irish Illustrated. Our producer is Tom Zwiller of also multimedia conglomerate of Irish Illustrated. And I am John Brice of Football Scoop and Irish Illustrated. This has been Irish Illustrated Overtime Live. Until the next one, enjoy this one. Thanks for tuning in.